The most sophisticated propaganda system in the ancient world was not primarily about armies. It was about architecture. Every Roman city was built to say the same thing: the Forum, the Triumphal Arch, the emperor's face on the coins that passed through every hand every day, the games that defined what entertainment was worth attending, the hierarchy that made explicit, in stone, in law, in social ritual, who mattered, who didn't, and what it meant to have arrived. Rome did not need to tell people what to think. It built the world they lived inside, until what it valued was simply reality, until ambition looked like virtue, until power looked like greatness, until the Roman definition of a good life felt less like ideology and more like common sense. And into that city, into communities of ordinary people who breathed Roman air, walked Roman streets, handled Roman coins, attended Roman games, Paul sent a letter. And in the middle of that letter, he issued what may be the most demanding single instruction in all of his writing. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. He was not telling them to leave Rome, not to stop handling the coins, not to avoid the streets. He was asking them to do something far harder: to refuse to let Rome shape their minds while living inside everything Rome had built. And the 3 steps he embedded in that command are as precise, as psychologically accurate, and as necessary now as they were in the first century.
Romans 12:2 contains 2 Greek words that most English translations flatten into something far less dramatic than what Paul actually wrote. The first word is syschematizesthe, from schema, pattern, form, external shape, and sin, together with, in accordance with. Syschematizesthe means to be pressed into a mold, to be squeezed into a form that comes from outside, to be fashioned according to a pattern you did not choose and may not even be aware of. It is passive, something done to you, something happening to the surface of who you are by the sustained pressure of the environment you live inside. Read that carefully. Paul is not primarily warning against deliberate moral choices. He is warning against something subtler and more dangerous: the gradual, invisible, entirely unconscious process by which a culture reshapes the people inside it simply by being consistently, repeatedly itself. Rome did not need to convince anyone of anything explicitly. It just needed to keep existing, with its values, its hierarchies, its definitions of worth, long enough that those values became the water people swam in. The second word is metamorphouste, from morphe, inner nature, essential form, the same root as metamorphosis. Transformation, not of the surface, of the essential structure. And the contrast between these 2 words is the entire architecture of what Paul is asking for. Syschematizesthe works from the outside in. Metamorphosthe works from the inside out. The world's pattern presses. Renewal transforms from within. And the question that the text immediately raises, the one Paul does not answer slowly, is this: how does the inside-out change happen? And this is where the story becomes deeply important. Before a mind can be renewed, the pattern it is currently inside has to become visible. And this is harder than it sounds, because the patterns of the world are not primarily the obviously wrong things. Those are easy to name and relatively easy to resist, or at least to feel the resistance against. The patterns that Paul is warning about are more like the assumptions underneath the assumptions. The narratives so embedded they no longer feel like narratives, they feel like reality. What makes a person valuable? The world's pattern, the schema of this age, answers that question automatically, without announcement. What you produce, what you earn, what you achieve, who knows you, how many people follow you, what you look like on your best day. You didn't sit down and reason your way to those metrics, you breathed them in. From the moment you were old enough to understand that some children were treated as more important than others, the pattern began its work. And here is what almost nobody names clearly. Israel did the same thing. 40 years in Egypt, building the infrastructure of the most powerful empire of their era. And then, set free, they carried Egypt's mental map into the wilderness with them. When the road got difficult, they didn't ask, What does God see in this situation? They asked, in Egypt we had food. In Egypt we sat by the flesh pots. In Egypt at least we knew what was coming. They were physically free and mentally still in Egypt. The body had left, the nous, the mind, had not. And this is still what happens. A person comes to genuine faith. They leave the life they were building. They enter something new and discover, slowly, sometimes painfully, that the patterns they were conformed to do not dissolve on the day of conversion. They persist in how you respond to criticism, in how you measure your own worth, in how you treat people with less social currency than you, in what you do with anger, in how you make decisions under pressure. The patterns are still running, like background software that the new operating system hasn't yet replaced. But before they can be renewed, they have to be seen.
Step 1. Recognition. 2 Corinthians 10:5. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Paul uses military language here: demolish, take captive, and almost nobody asks why the vocabulary of warfare applies to thoughts. But the answer is embedded in the structure of the sentence. You can only take captive what you have first seen running free. The thought that operates unconsciously, the automatic narrative, the reflexive judgment, the unexamined assumption, cannot be taken anywhere. It is already determining your response before you have noticed it is there. The first step in the renewal of the mind is not action, it is recognition. Honest, specific, undefended examination of the actual content of your interior world, not what you believe in theory, but what your instinctive responses reveal you believe in practice. And this is where ancient spiritual practice and modern psychological research arrive at exactly the same conclusion.
The Stoic philosophers, writing in the same Roman world Paul was writing into, called this prosoche, attention to the self, the deliberate, disciplined observation of one's own interior movements. The cognitive behavioral tradition, developed 20 centuries later without reference to Paul, builds its entire methodology on the same foundation. The thought must be identified before it can be challenged. And the Christian practice of examination, articulated most precisely by the Ignatian tradition as the examen, involves a daily review of the interior movements of the soul. Where was I moving toward God today? Where was I moving away? What was I feeling? And what did that reveal? This is not introspection for its own sake. It is the systematic removal of the blindfold. But here is the detail that carries enormous psychological weight. Recognition without truth produces only shame. Seeing the pattern without something better to orient toward creates the specific religious anxiety of someone who has become expert at cataloging their own failures without ever discovering that a different framework exists. And this is why the first step alone is not sufficient. It is the beginning, not the completion. Because what you see, once you see it, immediately raises the question, what do I replace it with?
Step 2. Replacement. Psalm 119 is the longest chapter in the Bible, 176 verses. All of them, in every verse, about one thing: the transformative power of the Word of God. Not its informativeness, not its authority, though it is authoritative, its transformative effect on the person who engages with it with sufficient depth and frequency. Verse 9, how can a young person stay on the path of purity? By living according to your word. Verse 11, I have hidden your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you. Verse 105, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light for my path. Not a searchlight, a lamp. Enough light for the next step. Not illumination of the entire landscape at once, the specific, present, adequate light for the immediate terrain. And almost nobody teaches why the word works the way it does. Because the renewal of the mind is not primarily cognitive, it is neurological. The patterns of the world, the schema of this age, are not merely philosophical positions. They are neural pathways, grooves in the brain's architecture, worn deep through years of repetition, that thought and response travel along with almost no conscious direction required. When something happens, the pathway fires, the feeling arrives, the interpretation assembles, the response emerges, all before you have had time to think about it, Because the thinking, in neurological terms, has already been done by every previous time you traveled that path. Renewing the mind, in this framework, is not a matter of deciding to think differently. It is the sustained, repeated creation of new pathways, alternative routes through the cognitive landscape that become over time as automatic as the old ones. And this is precisely what Ephesians 5:26 describes, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, not as metaphor, but as mechanism. The word does not merely inform, it washes. It progressively replaces the false architecture with a true one. But the replacement requires the same mechanism the original patterns used: repetition, sustained engagement, returning to the source often enough that the new pathway begins to deepen. And here is the ancient Hebrew practice that almost perfectly anticipated the neuroscience by 3,000 years.
Joshua 1:8. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night. The Hebrew word translated meditate is hagah. It does not mean what modern readers imagine when they hear the word. It does not mean sitting in silence with eyes closed, holding a concept gently. Hagah means to murmur, to mutter, to speak quietly and repeatedly to oneself. The image is of someone speaking the words of the text under their breath, the way a person might murmur a name they are trying to remember. Ancient meditation was vocal. It involved the lips, the breath, the auditory cortex. The word processed not just visually, but through the speaking of it. This is not spiritual superstition. This is the most effective method available for transferring information from working memory into long-term encoding. You were not meant to read the word once. You were meant to return to it, repeatedly, specifically, vocalizing, ruminating on it the way an animal chews cud, until the new pathway is deeper than the old one. Colossians 3:16 gives the destination. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Richly, plusios, abundantly, lavishly, not sparingly. Not the word visited occasionally, not the word consulted in crisis. The word dwelling, living inside the architecture, present before the need arrives. But the second step also has a limit, because the word engaged in isolation faces a structural problem that the third step must solve.
Step 3, reinforcement. Romans 12:2 is not the first verse in its chapter. Romans 12:1 comes before it, and almost nobody reads them together. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. The body comes first, not as an afterthought, as the precondition. Before the transformation of the mind, the offering of the body, the physical, embodied, costly surrender of what you are in time and space. And this sequence is not accidental, because the patterns of the world are reinforced not only cognitively, but physically. They are embedded in bodily habits, in what your hands reach for automatically, in the postures you assume in conflict, in the physical practices that structure your time, what you consume, how you rest, what you reach for when you are anxious. The body shapes the mind before the mind has had time to shape the body. And this means the renewal of the mind requires counter-physical practices, what the tradition calls spiritual disciplines or liturgies, that operate at the same level as the world's patterns, not as additional things to do, as the physical infrastructure through which the word can be reinforced against the sustained pressure of the surrounding culture.
But the third step goes further, because the world's patterns are also socially reinforced. Every conversation you are in either deepens the world's groove or begins to wear a new one. Every community you belong to either perpetuates the dominant schema or provides a counterformation pressure strong enough to work against it. Hebrews 10:24-25 is explicit. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Spur one another, paroxysmos, the provocative friction of community that notices when you have drifted before you have noticed yourself. The renewed mind is not formed in a room alone. It is formed in the encounter between a person choosing the word and a community choosing it alongside them. Where the reinforcement is mutual, the accountability is relational, and the counter pattern has enough social density to compete with the ambient pressure of the surrounding world.
The early church understood this instinctively. They did not read the letters Paul sent as individuals. They gathered, Acts 2:42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Teaching, the word as replacement; fellowship, the community as reinforcement; breaking of bread and prayer, the embodied practices. All three together, not any one of them alone. And the result was not a group of people who had correct ideas about Jesus. It was a community the surrounding world found undeniably different, not because they were trying harder than their neighbors to be good people, but because the nous, the mind, the faculty of perception, was being remade by a different source.
There is a grammatical detail in Romans 12:2 that the theology of mind renewal cannot survive without. Be transformed. Passive voice. Not transform yourself. Not achieve transformation through sustained effort. Be transformed. Something done to you. By someone outside you. Through means you cooperate with, but do not control. And almost nobody sits with what this implies. Because the three steps, recognition, replacement, reinforcement, are not a self-improvement program. They are acts of positioning. The recognition positions you to see what the Spirit has been trying to show you. The replacement positions you to receive what the Spirit communicates through the Word. The reinforcement positions you in a community where the Spirit works collectively. But the transformation itself, the actual metamorphosis, the change at the level of essential form, is the Spirit's work.
And this is the theological safety valve that prevents the renewing of the mind from becoming the Galatian problem in new clothing. Romans 8:6 names the destination. The mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. Not the mind that has correctly renewed itself is life and peace. The mind governed by the Spirit. The governance is His. The cooperation is yours. The transformation is His work in a person who has made the three moves that remove the obstacles to that work. And this changes the posture of the whole enterprise. You are not fighting your way to a renewed mind. You are cooperating your way toward one, removing as best you can what blocks the light, and trusting that the one who promised transformation is more committed to it than you are.
The renewal of the mind does not happen in a single session of Bible study. It does not happen in a retreat weekend or a conference or a season of intense spiritual discipline followed by a return to ordinary life. It happens the way a river changes the stone beneath it. Slowly, continuously, through the sustained pressure of water that seems, on any given day, to be accomplishing almost nothing. Until one morning you look at the stone and realize it no longer resembles what it was, and the people around you will often notice it before you do. Philippians 4:9. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. The peace is not the condition for the practice. The peace is the result of the practice that has been sustained long enough to reach the level of the morphe, the essential inner form, rather than staying at the level of the schema. And here is the detail about renewal that most teachers skip. It does not feel from the inside like becoming a different person. It feels slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly, like becoming more yourself, because the patterns of the world were never native to you. They were pressed in from outside. What the Spirit's renewal restores is the image that was always there beneath the pressure, the imago Dei, the image of God, that the conformation to the world's pattern had been obscuring for years. The renewed mind is not a foreign implant. It is what you were before the mold got to you.
Paul wrote Romans 12:2 to people who could not escape Rome. He did not tell them to leave. He told them to refuse to let Rome remake them from the inside, to recognize the schema pressing against them, to replace it daily, vocally, specifically, with a truth that came from a different source, to reinforce that replacement in a community of people doing the same work alongside them, and then to trust that the metamorphose, the inside-out essential nature transformation,
was being accomplished by a spirit more committed to its completion than they were capable of being on their best day. The world is still building its systems. Every platform, every algorithm, every ambient cultural message about what you are worth and what you should want and what a good life looks like is pressing continuously, without announcement, in 1,000 small decisions about what you consume, what you compare yourself against, what narratives your interior voice reaches for when no one is listening. The schema has not stopped working, which means the renewal has not become optional. 3 steps. Practiced not once, but continuously, not as a formula, but as a posture. See the pattern. Replace it with truth. Reinforce it in practice and community. And then, cooperate with a spirit who takes what we offer and does in us what the world's pressure could never do. Not press us into its shape, but restore us to our own.